This case is one that shocked an entire community. On the surface, the Reynolds family, Mark, Claire, Emily, and Noah, seemed like the picture of perfection. A successful father, a caring mother, 2 bright children, and a home that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. But behind those walls was a disturbing truth that no one could have imagined. In this documentary, we'll uncover the chilling details of how a family admired by neighbors turned into the center of one of the most unsettling cases Maplewood has ever seen. From Claire's mysterious disappearance to the terrifying secrets hidden inside their home, this story proves that appearances can be deceiving. Before we begin, make sure to support this channel by subscribing and staying active. It helps us continue bringing you deep dives into true crime cases like this one. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when a new case drops, and let's step into the story of the Reynolds family, where the perfect image unraveled into something far darker. The Reynolds family had the kind of life that made people stop and take notice. Their home sat on a quiet tree-lined street where the grass was always trimmed, the porch lights glowed warmly at night, and laughter often spilled out during summer evenings. Mark Reynolds was known as a successful architect whose designs were featured in local magazines, and Claire, his wife, was a beloved teacher at the nearby elementary school. Together they had 2 children, Emily, a talented gymnast, and Noah, a soccer enthusiast. To anyone looking in from the outside, the family seemed to embody stability, love, and achievement. They attended church on Sundays, threw cheerful backyard barbecues, and even hosted neighborhood holiday gatherings that became something of a tradition. Friends described them as the type of family that everyone wanted to emulate: well-mannered children, a hard-working father, and a caring mother who always had a smile to offer. But if one paid closer attention, small details occasionally stood out. Mark was often described as overly precise, the kind of man who liked things just so, and some noticed how Claire seemed careful with her words when he was nearby. She carried a gentle warmth that drew people in, yet there were moments when she looked distracted, as if something weighed heavily on her mind. Neighbors would sometimes remark that Emily and Noah weren't allowed to play outside as often as other children, and though the kids were polite, they seemed unusually quiet for their age. These were observations brushed aside at the time, easily explained by a busy schedule or strict parenting. To the outside world, the Reynolds family was perfect, almost too perfect. Nobody could have imagined that beneath the polished surface of their happy image, a darkness was quietly growing, waiting for its moment to break free. It was a chilly October evening when the first signs of trouble emerged. Claire Reynolds was expected at an important school board meeting she had been preparing for all week, but when the session began, her chair remained empty. At first, colleagues assumed she was running late, perhaps caught up in traffic or delayed by some family matter. Yet as the minutes ticked by, concern began to build. Claire was known for her reliability. She was never careless with commitments, especially those involving her students and the community. By the time the meeting ended without her, whispers of worry had already started. That night, when she failed to return home, neighbors noticed unusual activity at the Reynolds house. Lights flickered on and off as if someone was pacing from room to room. Mark claimed that Claire had stepped out to visit a friend, but when asked, he couldn't provide a name or address. More concerning was the discovery that her car sat untouched in the driveway, keys and phone left behind on the kitchen counter. It was as though she had simply vanished without taking any of the essentials a person would need to leave the house. As hours stretched into the early morning, the sense of unease spread quickly. By the next day, friends were calling, texting, and stopping by to check in, only to leave unsettled when no answers were found. Within 48 hours, her absence could no longer be explained away as a misunderstanding or a spontaneous trip. Mark filed a missing persons report, and police entered the picture. What began as a quiet worry in the neighborhood soon escalated into the kind of story that dominates headlines: a beloved wife and mother gone without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a growing sense of dread. As investigators dug deeper into Claire's disappearance, they began speaking with neighbors who had lived alongside the Reynolds family for years. At first, many described them in glowing terms, pointing out how Mark always kept his yard immaculate and how Claire's kindness had touched so many through her work at the school. But once the initial surface details were gathered, more complicated stories started to emerge. People who had brushed off certain moments in the past now reconsidered them with a new perspective, and what had once seemed ordinary began to feel unsettling. One neighbor recalled how Mark rarely allowed the children to spend time outside unsupervised. Even on sunny afternoons when the rest of the street filled with kids playing, Emily and Noah were often kept indoors, watching from the window. When they did come out, it was only for brief moments, and their father's watchful eyes were never far. Others noted how Claire, though polite and friendly, seemed strangely withdrawn when Mark was near. At community events, she would laugh and engage with others until he approached, and then her demeanor would shift, as if she were cautious about saying too much. Some even mentioned disturbing sounds that occasionally came from the Reynolds home at night. Loud thuds, hurried footsteps, and then sudden silence. At the time, these noises were dismissed as normal household activity, children playing or home projects being carried out. But now, in light of Claire's disappearance, those recollections took on an ominous meaning. The longer detectives listened, the more they realized that the perfect family image had cracks that no one had paid attention to before. The Reynolds family, once seen as the epitome of suburban charm, began to look less like role models and more like a mystery hiding in plain sight. When police were finally granted permission to conduct a thorough search of the Reynolds home, they expected to find routine evidence, a note, perhaps some clue about where Claire might have gone. Instead, what they uncovered cast a disturbing shadow over the family's carefully polished image. The search began upstairs, moving methodically through bedrooms and closets. Nothing appeared unusual at first glance. The children's rooms were tidy, Claire's teaching materials were neatly stacked on her desk, and the kitchen looked lived in but ordinary. It wasn't until they reached the basement that the tone of the investigation shifted completely. Behind a heavy locked door, investigators discovered a hidden room that Mark had never mentioned. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves, and on them were dozens of photographs of Claire. These weren't family portraits or happy candid shots. Instead, they showed her in moments of distress, looking tired, startled, or caught off guard. Some were taken while she was sleeping, others while she appeared to be in tears. None of them felt like the images a loving husband would cherish. Even more unsettling were the journals tucked away in a small box. They belonged to Claire, each filled with handwritten entries that revealed a side of her life no one had known about. She wrote of feeling trapped, describing Mark's controlling behavior and her growing fear of him. In several passages, she hinted at wanting to leave, but she also expressed a belief that he would never allow it. The words painted a heartbreaking picture of a woman silently struggling beneath the surface of what seemed like a perfect marriage. What had once been regarded as an ordinary family basement now stood as the strongest evidence that something sinister had been taking place behind closed doors, hidden from the outside world. As investigators questioned Mark Reynolds further, they quickly realized that his version of events was filled with holes. On camera, he appeared calm, even rehearsed, as he pleaded for his wife's safe return. He told reporters that he had been at home the entire night Claire vanished, watching over the children and working on architectural designs. At first, this seemed plausible, but when detectives obtained his phone records, the story began to unravel. Data showed his phone pinging cell towers miles away from Maplewood, suggesting that he had driven north during the critical hours when Claire disappeared. When confronted, Mark insisted it must have been a mistake or a technical glitch, but investigators pressed on. Security footage from a highway tollbooth confirmed his car traveling in that same direction. The exact route aligned suspiciously with wooded areas known for being isolated, places where someone might go to avoid being seen. This discovery added to the growing unease about his behavior. Friends who had initially defended him began to recall troubling memories. One mentioned how Mark often spoke about not believing in divorce, saying that marriage was forever, no matter what. Another recalled how Claire had once shown up at her house with a small bruise on her arm, quickly brushing it off as an accident. At the time, no one questioned it further, but in hindsight, these moments took on a chilling significance. Mark's calm demeanor, once seen as admirable composure, now appeared cold and detached. Detectives began piecing together a narrative that suggested he wasn't just a worried husband but someone with something far darker to hide. The mask of the model family man was slipping, and underneath it, investigators suspected, was a man capable of orchestrating a terrible crime. 3 weeks after Claire's disappearance, the case took a devastating turn when 2 hikers exploring a remote wooded area stumbled upon a shallow grave. Disturbed earth and a faint, unsettling odor led them to call the authorities. When investigators arrived and carefully uncovered the site, they confirmed the worst fear: it was Claire Reynolds. The discovery sent shockwaves through Maplewood. What had begun as a missing persons case was now a confirmed homicide. The condition of the grave revealed that little effort had been made to conceal her. The body was wrapped in a blanket that friends immediately recognized from the Reynolds living room. Forensic teams found strands of rope near her wrists and ankles, which matched a roll of rope later located in Mark's garage. These were not coincidences, they were deliberate links tying the crime back to the Reynolds household. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma as the cause of death. There were no signs of a struggle outside the injuries, which suggested Claire had been caught off guard, likely in her own home. This detail pointed strongly to someone she trusted, someone she would not fear until it was too late. Investigators pieced the evidence together and concluded that Claire had been killed before being transported north to the secluded area where her body was buried. The once idyllic image of the Reynolds family shattered completely. Neighbors who had admired their tidy lawn and smiling faces were horrified that such violence had unfolded behind those closed doors. The Reynolds children were now caught in a nightmare, their mother gone and their father increasingly implicated. The discovery of Claire's body not only provided the answers to her disappearance but also raised even darker questions about the man she had lived with and the life she had been forced to hide. The arrest of Mark Reynolds marked the beginning of a trial that gripped Maplewood and drew attention far beyond the small suburban town. When the case went to court, prosecutors presented a picture of a man who had carefully maintained the illusion of a perfect life while hiding a dangerous obsession with control. The evidence laid out was both damning and disturbing. Photographs from the hidden basement room were shown to the jury, each image painting Claire not as a cherished wife, but as someone monitored, documented, and stripped of her privacy. Her journals were introduced as well, their pages filled with confessions of fear and desperation. In her own words, Claire had described her marriage as a cage and her husband as the warden. The prosecution argued that Mark killed her the night she made a final attempt to leave, unwilling to accept the loss of the carefully curated life he had built. They connected his late-night drive north, the rope, the blanket, and the shallow grave to establish a chain of events that pointed only to him. Forensic experts confirmed that fibers from the blanket matched those found on Claire's body, and the rope discovered at the scene was identical to the one in his garage. The defense tried to portray Mark as a devoted husband wrongfully accused, suggesting that Claire may have left on her own and encountered foul play elsewhere. But the mountain of evidence overshadowed these claims. Each witness, from neighbors recalling strange noises to friends testifying about Claire's fear of her husband, added weight to the prosecution's story. Inside the courtroom, the once respected architect sat stone-faced as the truth unfolded. The mask of the family man had fully fallen away, replaced by the image of a man whose need for control had led him to commit the ultimate crime. When the verdict was finally delivered, the town of Maplewood seemed to collectively hold its breath. Mark Reynolds was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For many, it was a moment of justice, but it was also a devastating reminder of how appearances can deceive. The man once celebrated for his architectural achievements and picture-perfect family image was now permanently associated with one of the darkest crimes the community had ever witnessed. For Emily and Noah, the verdict marked the beginning of a new and painful chapter. They were placed in the care of extended relatives, their lives uprooted overnight. The home they once knew was now an empty shell, avoided by neighbors who couldn't bear to look at the windows where they had once seen holiday decorations and warm family gatherings. The Reynolds house, once a symbol of suburban charm, became a chilling landmark. Whispers spread that no one wanted to move into it, as though the walls carried the weight of the tragedy. Maplewood itself struggled to recover. Residents who had admired the Reynolds family now questioned how they could have missed the signs. The discovery of Claire's journals and the haunting photographs from the basement left many unsettled, wondering how much of what they see in others can ever be trusted. Community events that once felt joyous became tinged with caution, as if the illusion of safety had been broken for good. Over time, the story of the Reynolds family became a cautionary tale. It reminded people that darkness can exist behind even the brightest smiles, and that the most polished facades can conceal the most troubling secrets. What had seemed like the perfect family was, in truth, a haunting reminder that perfection often hides something deeply wrong.